Really having a tough time figuring out how to do a good intro for this review. Oh yeah, I know.
More brains.
Return of the Living Dead stars Clu Gulager, Linnea Quigley, Tom Matthews, and is directed by Dan O'Bannon. So isn't it nice that every now and then you'll watch a movie and you're way late to the party, and that movie becomes an instant classic? That's what happened to me with Return of the Living Dead. I didn't see this movie until a few years ago, maybe like in the last 5 years, and instantly it was one of my favorite horror movies. That rarely ever happens. A lot of times movies have to digest. Sometimes your favorite movies aren't necessarily completely great the first time, but Return of the Living Dead, like I said, it blew me away. Loved it. I could see how groundbreaking this movie was, and really it still is. It's still very unique. So Shout Factory just put out a new collector's edition. This is what it looks like. It is gorgeous looking. The slipcover is just amazing, and everything about this. And I love that they give you the option of the original artwork too. Anyway, I have been dying to do a review for this movie. I've been planning on doing Return of the Living Dead for a while now. Like I said, it's one of my favorites. So anyway, let's get into this review. So Tom Matthews plays Freddy, and he is a young protege. He gets a job at this medical supply warehouse, and this toxin, this gas, gets released, and the toxin raises the dead, literally. And then you get these group of punk rock kids. They're partying and they go to this cemetery, and they just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time when all these dead start coming to life. So throughout this movie, it just gets more and more chaotic, but also it gets more and more hilarious.
Come in slash 10 more paramedics.
Now the story behind this movie is really interesting because, as you know, Night of the Living Dead came out in '68, and it was written by John Russo and George Romero. After that movie, they kind of split ways, so they both still wanted, some share in the property. Romero ended up making Dawn of the Dead, and Russo ended up making Return of the Living Dead. Return of the Living Dead as a name sounds more like a sequel to Night, but the only reason it's called that is because Russo got the rights to the name The Living Dead. And this is really a battle that just went on for years and years. And originally the script wasn't a comedy or a comedy horror. It was really just a straight up horror movie. But then Dan O'Bannon came into the picture. Dan O'Bannon actually wrote Alien, which is a very different film and tone than Return of the Living Dead. And really he just surprised everybody with the script, because keep in mind, before this movie, there were very few comedy horrors, if any. So when the producers read the script, they were really confused. Is this a comedy? Is this a horror? What is this? They didn't get it. But once the film was being made and they saw the actors performing the parts, they realized, oh, this is kind of genius. And especially when the movie actually came out, it really was a groundbreaking movie. And it really didn't get its just desserts until probably the last 10-15 years. I remember I personally avoided this movie for a long time because it was one of those VHS covers that you looked at and thought, this really looks like a cheap B movie. And I didn't take it seriously until I started going on to movie forums, and I constantly would hear the name Return of the Living Dead pop up over and over and over. And so eventually I thought, hey, I'm gonna give this movie a shot. And I get it. It is really just a great comedy horror. It's groundbreaking. First off, the characters, they are really well thought out. And when you watch this movie, everything feels like it's put together very well. And that's because O'Bannon actually had everybody do rehearsals for 2 weeks before principal photography. And so once they finally jumped into their parts, they already knew them back and front. And there's really a flow to this movie. It's very well edited, and it's very well acted because they are well rehearsed. And the characters are very unique in this movie. They're not really throwaway characters, they're memorable. Especially the punk rock kids. Miguel Nunez, who you might know from Friday the 13th Part 5, he was actually homeless when he got the part for this movie, and he didn't tell anybody. He actually was living in homeless shelters. And if that's not motivation enough for anybody to get off their ass and do what they want to do, I don't know what is. I mean, this guy didn't have a home, and he ends up being in one of the most iconic horror movies ever. Also, Tom Matthews, he could have approached this part as just a straight-laced, preppy kid, but he didn't do that. He actually made the character of Freddy really interesting. He had a lot of these quirky mannerisms throughout the movie, and his character has more of an arc than any other character in the movie. He starts off kind of normal, still a little weird, and by the end of the movie, because he's the most affected by the events, you'll see what I'm talking about if you watch the movie. He really has to turn in a remarkable performance. And then finally, I gotta talk about the character Trash, Linnea Quigley. She is the character I think is probably the most shocking. I love the way she acts in this movie. She's the strangest.
Do you ever fantasize about being killed?
Never.
Do you ever wonder about all the different ways of dying? You know, violently? I wonder, like, what would be the most horrible way to die?
The worst way would be for a bunch of old men to get around me and start biting and eating me alive.
And she really had to do a lot of risque stuff in this movie, let's be honest. And the first time I saw it, the 12-year-old in me literally leaped right out. Okay, I guess I can't say literally, but yeah, you get the idea. As a matter of fact, there were a lot of tensions on set as to her part because the famous tombstone dance scene, there was a lot of controversy on how far they could actually take it for that scene. And really, Linnea Quigley is the B-movie scream queen. I guess Jamie Lee Curtis is the A-list, but Linnea Quigley was actually in quite a few B horror movies, like Silent Night, Deadly Night, and of course, this movie. Okay, now we're gonna talk about the zombies. More brains. The zombies in this movie, I think, are probably the most interesting out of most zombie movies because this is the first movie where zombies wanted to eat your brains. In Night of the Living Dead, they would eat your flesh, but they wouldn't go as far as eating your brains. In this one, they craved brains. And after you watch this movie, it's like hearing one of those songs that you can't help but repeat it over and over. You're gonna be saying more brains constantly after this movie. It's just so catchy. And the zombies can't be killed in this movie. You have to literally disintegrate them to kill them. And they run after you. So they're much more threatening. I would say arguably, and prove me wrong if you can, but there is no zombie in history that can compare to Tarman. This guy right here. Tarman is literally one of the coolest looking zombies, and the reason he works so well, A, is because of his look, but also the actor. Let me say that again, the actor that played him. They didn't go with a stuntman. They actually got a guy who could act with his body as well as his face. And the movements of Tarman are just striking and just scene stealing. And he even talks, which is interesting because most zombies don't talk. But all the zombies in this movie, their characters in the movie, they're really interesting, and a lot of them look very different. Perhaps the biggest thing that I can say about Return of the Living Dead, especially for somebody that hasn't seen it, is it's a movie that you will never forget. It is really, really funny at a time when there were no horror comedies, or very little, and it's just so memorable. It's iconic. But most importantly, I think it's fun. It's not the horror movie that you put in and you want to get all serious. No, this is the type of movie that you put in, you have your popcorn, maybe a few friends around, you just have a blast. At the end of Return of the Living Dead, you are just elated. It's just such a fun time. So for that, I'm definitely gonna give this groundbreaking zombie movie a Trapped on an Island. So anyway guys, that is my review for Return of the Living Dead. And also check out my playlist for Trapped on an Island movies. These are all the movies that I think are, I don't want to say perfect because that's a subjective term, but in my mind, they're 5-star movies. And also I gotta say thank you Scream Factory for giving us such a great collector's edition for this movie. It's 2 discs, it's loaded with extra features. Couldn't be happier. So as always guys, thank you for watching. Subscribe to Drumdums, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd, and
More brains.